Hello everyone, and welcome to a video regarding Skyforge and its damage classes. We have videos about the topics, what are meta classes, how to use meta classes, and so on. But often enough I get the question, what exactly is so different about some classes that we don't consider them meta? And I thought I'd just do bursts to the best extent of my knowledge to show you what an endgame player can achieve on those certain classes, which in return means that we have a conversation of what a class can do, put out, whatever. I will comment on different things on the class while we're going through this, and I will explain some misconceptions also about some classes and why they are not meta, or why they are meta, or why they are in between. We will start with the first class now, and this will be the witch. I kinda ranked what we will see from the lowest end to the higher end, and we can now see that I bursted for around, or cited for around 1 minute. My limitation was I want to use everything that pumps up your damage, at least use it twice. So we get an average, at least a bit of an amount, because I didn't want to do 5 minutes videos, but the results would be roundabout the same. What we have here is the witch burst. We have lots of stuff here that is the typical skills for the witch. On the highest end it would be, for example, the taint extend 2, the murder of crows, the living helper, one of the symbols, one of the terror symbol, and then we already go in a really low percentage of the of the damage values. So what exactly is the problem with the witch? The witch is designed to be a damage over time class. It's basically meant to have a constant dot on an enemy that gives you a stream over time that is strong. But with the current state of the game, or so not current state, long state of the game favors short bursts way more than consistent damage. This is because how buffs work. Buffs at the moment are most of the time on a 40-sec cooldown, and then amplify your damage by a huge margin. As we can see, the highest damage skill for our witch is the taint. The problem with tainted is that it is a skill that is giving a dot on the enemy, and this dot is running through the whole time. But you have to refresh it because it has a 9-second duration. If you now burst, you get your buffs applied, and then you throw your taint on it, and you then try to multiply the damage and whatnot. What the skills do. The design of the class was initially that it has a consistent damage and its base values are pretty low. So even if you push that base values high, they don't go that much higher. And so they don't react that good to buffs and to a burst rotation. And as you can now imagine, if you get every 40 seconds a stronger but still meh dot that you can amplify, your damage doesn't go skyrocket. This pretty much puts the witch on the lowest end on the actual damage. The next class we go over is one of the starter classes, and that is Cryomancer. So Cryomancer, with nearly the same time, as you can see, does a bit more damage, but it's DPS wise he's even lower on this case. The only thing going for it that is a bit more reactive to spike damage, so you can get out some bigger numbers, but it doesn't really change as much. The Cryomancer was designed as a AoE CC class, which is actually a great idea, but the problem is because the AoE of the Cryomancer, the Whiteout, which is the highest damage part here, is so vast, so wide, that they trimmed down his damage really low. So he does not um, deal as much damage. Again, the base values are low, and those low base values add up to the problem that he just can't put out as much damage. And there are even classes that sport a higher AoE potential than him damage-wise. CC would be a nice thing if you are just fighting CCable mobs. But everything that has more than 4 bars is totally unCCable, and even 4 bars have a strong resistance against CC in general. Means it pretty much renders your whole crowd control useless. And for that, Cryo gets the place he's in. The next thing on my list, and probably will spike some debates, is the Archer. The Archer's damage output is largely reliant on the aimed shot, which has a special ability to deal 150% more damage when he does the first aim shot in a fight. So it's designed to do one good mark sniper shot to kill something, which in some instances work pretty well. But every subsequent aim shot is weaker, which means since he is designed about a do one shot and then you're good design, his damage output overall is lacking because he doesn't have the ability to amplify his damage or has the base damage that he needs to put out enough damage to burst through stuff. I mean, I took a shorter time here than on the other things, like 10 seconds, but even if I would have done a longer period, you can see that his damage over time, over the seconds that we were in that burst, is higher than the Witch, of course, and higher than the Cryomancer, but even on a longer scale, his damage wouldn't increase that much. And that is what puts the Archer in his place that he is currently on. You have the problem that only your first shot is dealing enough damage to be considered good, and the rest is mediocre at best. The class still gets loved by many people, but it isn't working out as good in the current meta. Well, next class. That is the Monk. The Monk it itself is not really pleasant to play for my take, since all the combinations you need to take into account for it to do a reasonable amount of spiking damage is difficult to handle, to say the least. Still, it out DPS's Archer by a large margin, and it can be used if you like it, but he is right under that what we would consider meta in our bursting efforts. Just because firstly he's melee, which makes it difficult to put him in some situations. And on the other stuff, he is just not as good setup to other stuff. I know there are some monk mains that can do magical work with it, and I've seen it. But overall, its damage output over this time isn't as great and not that easy to execute than other classes are. Especially since he has interactions with companion charges, which then again means if you want to abuse that to a bigger extent, you need to go for a specific build that allows you to reset companion charges easier, and this again gives every other DPS build. So in that regard, it's difficult to take Monk as a meta class, but the potential could be there on some point. The next thing is our first class that we consider meta in the bursting area. Here we need to distinguish that the Outlaw that we now speak about is the lowest tier that I would say is meta for playing in a raid. The reason here is he has many abilities on a really low cooldown besides his ultimate that allow him to deal a constant stream of damage, and he is designed around that. So he's kinda on the middle ground between a real meta class and the Witch, for example, which is also designed about having a constant damage stream. With the right legendary weapon and some workarounds, you can deal exceptional for this class good amount of damage, but it is not as easy to perform well with this class. The next thing we have here is the Slayer. The Slayer is one of the classes that just recently, thanks to a new legendary weapon, came to shine. Or shine in a meta that he now deals enough damage to even be considered to be played in a raid. The biggest problem here is that the usage is highly timing dependent, and you have a big problem that resolves around dealing enough damage on a certain instances. The highest damage source you have is Twilight Scourge. With a new weapon, you deal way more damage if Twilight Scourge is critting. Like every crit on a Twilight Scourge already deals 3 times the normal damage. If you now have the more critical damage in it, it goes really high. So if enough crit enhancing abilities are used, he can perform pretty good, and for this much he can outperform the Outlaw and probably can even outperform a Revenant or a Gunner. I'm not sure how far up that can go because it needs a really specific setup to make him really go all out. Next thing would be the Gunner. I have compared burst-wise the two legendary weapons, the mains and the Kara. Both weapons deal round about the same damage, despite what people may think. No, there's no advantage in using one over the other, just the rotations differ. So, as you can see, its damage per second is now a huge jump from, for example, the Outlaw. And also his delivered damage over the time now finally reaches the 1G mark. Here we have this point. The Gunner is, for my case, not the most meta class, but he is on the right way, on the right field that you can use him, but only if you have one of the two legendary weapons. Without legendary weapons, this is absolutely not possible. Okay. The next thing is the Revenant. For the Revenant now, we have the deal. As you can see, I put him higher in ranking than I put in the Gunner, although their times are close by. Why do I do that? I do that because of this one, the slashing, no, not slashing blow, the punishment. If you have an enemy that is below 50% HP, this one will deal triple damage, which in that case means it will not be 12% damage dealt and not the the tell me say 118 million. It will be somewhere around this area or even higher. And which makes it interesting for us is that if you consider that on a ultimate burst that is going on, you can use punishment way more often than slaughter, because lower costs, it means your damage output spikes tremendously and will probably go up to 1 to 1 to 1G to 1G to 1.3G or something in a burst phase. So this puts a Revenant in a special spot, because if they are in a normal fighting area, their damage is like in the mediocre area of damage. But when an enemy gets below a certain threshold, his damage will spike up tremendously, which in return means that you have to judge it differently from situation to situation. And with this different judging on situations, you need to consider him higher in total usefulness and DPS than you have to consider it when you watching for the gunner, for example. So next stuff we have to watch for is another exception here, and that is the Kinetic. He had a bit longer burst duration, but you can see its damage over time is still fairly high. The problem why, at least at the moment, the Kinetic is not considered meta, or at least just semi-meta, is because his burst rotations are not bound to a 40 sec cooldowns, but to a 20 sec cooldowns. Means every 20 seconds you could burst. Since you are only receiving half the benefits from bursting every 40 seconds, you getting not as much power out of it than you would actually possibly do. So in that regard means he is a good class for a steady damage stream, and if buffs are applied more regularly, like looking for the channeling on, for example, some light binders when they are in a regularly channeling like in between buffs, which is totally possible, then his damage goes up tremendously. But it's most times the buffs are continued on 40 seconds, which means that you don't have the advantage with him. But still his damage amount is considerably good. Here must but still be said that this is with a legendary weapon that speeds up the progress of throwing those stone projectiles. Because the stone projectiles are what makes our damage go crazy. And if you don't use the legendary gloves, you won't be able to pull off more than 2 spears per bursting phase, because just the animations take too long. So this is another case where legendary weapon is the only way to actually achieve a decent DPS here. But again, because he doesn't really fit the current meta with the 40-second bursts, he's not considered that strong. So now we go finally in the upper tier here, and that would be the Firestarter. With the current development, the Firestarter is the newest DPS addition we have, and he deals a tremendous amount of damage as long as we see fit on the damage board. As you can see, there is a 5 million jump in damage per second for this guy. He is a crazy power horse and has one big advantage over most others, and that is he does not need a legendary weapon because his base values for his damage are so crazy high that he just makes it straight to the top tiers of the damage dealers without much restraint. The next thing here for my take is Berserker. Berserker has, let's say there are 2 positions now that could be interchangeable for you depending on how you view it. The thing with the Berserker and his strongest burst with the Iron Heart weapon is that every strike he does deals more damage than the strike before. When we don't have buffs, this difference between what the first strike is and what the next strike is isn't that much different. So here we just end on the lower total damage per second, but the Berserker reacts extremely good to might and damage percentage buffs. So this puts him in a special position to be still considered the strongest burst class, since he reacts so exceptionally well for the buffs he receives. Now we get to the last class, and at least my personal best, or my most liking, the Necromancer. The Necromancer, especially with his newest weapon, and I always use the best weapon for every comparison here, sports a tremendous amount of damage that spikes even higher than most other classes can put out. As you can see, he had 23 million DPS per second. If we now go for the Firestarter, this is 20 million per second, which makes it again a crazy good damage class. In the current state, the strongest you can have for AoE or single target. But this is only if you don't consider, like said before, that the Berserker can increase his damage per strike exceptionally. So for bursting, those 2 classes could be interchangeable for what you say is the best damage class currently. Every class that is at least on the scale of here, at least on the scale of the Outlaw is considered not weak, but a few have different problems that don't make them matter at all, or at least not at the moment. So this was it for the comparison video. Maybe this just bored you the hell out of you, or maybe it could reveal some hidden stuff to you. I hope you enjoyed the video and learned something out of it. Have a nice day.